So, we're going to talk a little bit today about boundary issues in counseling. So, what are boundary issues? Boundary issues are a lack of definition of roles between the counselor and the client, or diffused roles in the relationship. Boundary issues are also considered dual or multiple relationships, having two or more roles with a client simultaneously or sequentially. So, some examples of boundary issues are bartering counseling for goods or services, providing counseling to a relative or friend's relative or a friend, socializing with clients, accepting gifts from clients, attending social events of the client, emotional or sexual involvement with a client or former client, combining roles of supervisor and counselor, giving home phone or cell phone numbers to the client, discussing counselor's personal experiences with a client. So, most of the things that I mentioned are kind of obvious, right? In terms of the dual relationships and things that might be questionable. But sometimes dual relationships can be difficult to recognize, particularly if you're in the moment with the client. There are often no danger signs to stop you um, in terms of once you're in the situation. So it's a slippery slope, right? You make a little bit um, of a boundary diffusion, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then you end up having a very serious ethical issue or harming the client. So the thing about dual relationships and boundary issues is that there are no specific guidelines for many of these situations. So there's that picture of a sign that says slippery slope ahead, right? Now, as the sign on this slide says, do no harm. We always have to remember that while we're thinking about our clients, when we're thinking about decisions. And dual relationships can increase the potential for harm to client. Sometimes there are incompatible expectations, particularly from the client, divergent responsibilities. You always have a power differential, always, as a counselor over a client, because you will always know things about the client that they wouldn't tell other people, right? Or you will always know more about the client than they know about you, right? Dual relationships can increase potential for a conflict of interest as well, exploitation of a client, distortion of the professional relationship, especially the fact that it's a therapeutic relationship. Right? So you have to think about what is the main focus of what's happening here. And also realizing that friends are very different than counselors and clients and employers, supervisors. So you have to really have a clear idea of the definitions of the relationships as well. So the idea is, should you avoid all dual relationships or boundary issues? No, you can't avoid all dual relationships, and we're going to talk about some later on. And not all dual relationships are harmful, but anytime there is a dual relationship, there is a chance that you could have an ethical violation and that you could harm the clients. Some are beneficial to clients. So the idea is to minimize the risk to clients when there's possible dual relationships, right? Set healthy boundaries from the outset. Secure and informed consent, and within that, discuss the potential risks and benefits of the dual relationship. Remain willing to discuss unforeseen problems and refer the client if necessary, if it becomes too much, right? Consult with other professionals to resolve dilemmas and seek supervision. Document everything that you have done and examine your own motivations. Is the reason that you are doing something more about your need to help the client rather than the client's need for counseling? So there is a broad middle ground between ill-advised dual relationships of any type and being like automaton like coldness, right? There's a broad middle ground. And there are extremes in either direction can create difficulties, right? Being cold, being refusing a small gift, a very small gift from a client might cause other issues. If you sticking to a black or white type of ideal around this is going to be impossible. The concept of boundaries can be abused, and it's very important for you to stick to basic boundaries. Professional boundaries provide an envelope within which a warm, empathetic environment can be created. And remember, part of counseling is teaching clients about their own boundaries and how to set their own boundaries with others. And the way that we do that is by setting the example of setting boundaries with our clients. So there's something called boundary crossings, which are a type of dual relationship, but it's a departure from the usual framework of the counseling relationship. These neither exploit or harm the client. They may actually advance the therapeutic alliance. These are not routine and not something that you would do normally and not something that you would make a habit of. So, for example, helping a client, you're not supposed to touch clients, but a client falls and you help them up. Technically, that's a boundary crossing, right? Appropriate self-disclosure, which we're going to talk about later. Doing a hospital or home visit for an ill or bedridden client. You wouldn't do that all the time, but maybe right now you will, kind of thing. If you have a client who has a fear of flying, you might take a plane ride with him or her. That's not normally something that you would do with clients, but that might be something that is actually therapeutically appropriate for that client. Boundary violations are much more serious. They tend to be exploitive or harmful, and really do damage to clients. These are a direct conflict with preservation of clients' dignity and integrity of the therapeutic process. So the idea is what you're doing is completely opposite of the do no harm principle. Clients may also attempt boundary violations, and it's your job to stop them. So the actions on the part of the counselor is to stop the boundary violation and also to not suggest them. So your client wants to know about you, right? That's not why we're here. We're here to help the client. The client maybe buys you one small token and then maybe another one and another one and another one, right? At some point, you have to stop. There are intense boundary violations for clients, and it's really, really important that you work hard to set those boundaries. Clients might, you have a 50-minute session, clients might stay an hour and then an hour and 15 minutes. And you right, those types of things. Those boundaries are very, very important. And it actually does harm to clients to have very long sessions that are outside the normal times, because that actually prevents the clients from learning boundaries. So even things like that you would think were not that big of a deal can be, based depending on the type of client. Bartering is also something that can be allowed in ethical codes. It's trading counseling services for clients' goods or services. These are often financially motivated. Clients unable to pay for sessions, things like that. They can be culturally appropriate, so you have to be careful around that. And one of the issues with bartering is, what is an even exchange, right? Painting your entire house for how many counseling sessions? So it's something that's really important to think about. The client must request bartering rather than the counselor bring that about. And the agreement needs to be very specific, has very specific guidelines before services are exchanged. You do this, I will do this, kind of thing. And I would make it a written agreement. I would also seek supervision before doing this. Social relationships are something that, we really get to know our clients very, very well. And there are times when we want to do something with our clients or for our clients. We just have to be very, very careful. Like, how deep do you get, right? Do you say hello in the store? Do you go to their wedding, their graduation? Do you gossip with them about things or talk politics with them? Do you actually have friendships? Like, how deep do you get, right? And whose idea are these relationships? And whose function? Like, what is the point of this? There are cultural considerations around this. Um, there are also theoretical based considerations. Um, and you have to determine basic social relationships early, right? So, one of the things I'll do with clients in the first, usually the first or second session, is when we're doing informed consent, is say, if we meet in a store, normally what I would do to protect your confidentiality is pretend I don't see you, that I don't know you. If we meet in a store, is that what you want me to do? Right? Or if we meet in a store, I will take your lead, right? So if you come up to me, I'll be happy to talk to you, but I want you to understand that if I'm, particularly when I was working in a very small town when there was only one grocery store, you're bound to run into your clients in a grocery store. So it was really important to set that social relationship up in terms of what I would do or say or not do. And usually it would be I would completely ignore you and you decide what you're going to do. You can ignore me, not going to hurt my feelings, or you could come up to me, talk to me, you could wave at me, whatever. I will only react to you if you react to me, kind of thing. Um, and then what about after counseling terminates? Like, where does the relationship end, right? One thing I can tell you is you need to avoid friendships completely with your clients. That is obviously a don't do. That's one of those don't do things, right? When I started with my master's degree, I would have friends come up to me and say, "Oh, you're going to be a counselor. I want you to counsel me." And so let's talk a little bit about counseling your friends. Don't do it. You absolutely do not do it. So I often get like, I have this problem. Since you're a counselor, what should I do? So how do you respond, right? Usually what I say is, look, we're friends rather than a counselor. I can talk to you as a friend and I'm happy to do so, but I'm definitely not your counselor, right? Um, but then you get the questions of my sister, my other friend, so you really have to make some decisions before you get into all of this. Should you counsel friends of friends? Should you counsel relatives of friends, children? Should you counsel the teachers you work with as a school counselor? You might need to, but then you're also friends with them, sort of, right? So what do you do? So there there are a lot of these types of situations where you're going to have to think about this now, before really you get into practicum, um, and you're going to have to come up with a way to explain to people that you are not their counselor. I mean, I would actually joke and say, look, you're not paying me right now, so I'm not analyzing you, I'm not trying to counsel you, I'm just talking to you. My closer friends, I would just say, no, I want to talk to you as a friend. You're my friend, and that's the relationship that we have. So you really have to think about that. Um, Pre-COVID, uh, we talked about touching clients and whether or not you touched clients. And a lot of this really depends on the culture, the types of clients, the type of touch, and what you're comfortable with and what your clients are comfortable with. One of the things that we say is that touch should be initiated by the client. And as a general rule, don't touch the adults. Don't touch adult clients. Um, Children will come up to you and hug you, and you can kind of pat them on the back, those kinds of things. Generally, but here's the other thing: if your client has had a real emotional session and they just want to give you a hug, and you're okay with that, and they initiate it, there's nothing wrong with that. But again, if you're female and it's a male client, if you're male and you've got to be really careful. If it's a child, Are they trying to um, just give you a short hug, or are they trying a different type of relationship with you if they think they can manipulate you by touch, those kinds of things. So those are all things that you have to think about. Clearly, because of COVID, during COVID, um, we're not touching our clients, but so you often have business and financial relationships. These are similar to personal relationships. You have to think about, um, do you move to another town to to from where you're working so that your financial relationships and business relationships don't interconnect with your clients. So if you are living in a town and you have to go pay your water bill, and the person that uh, works at town hall and takes the money for your water bill is your client, like that's a little, like, how do you do that, right? I would discuss these things just like you discuss um, what do we do if we see each other in public. Discuss these things open with the client, because you'll know where your client works, right? Generally, business relationships tend to have more concrete boundaries. You go in, you pay your bill, you say thank you, and you leave. There's no, socializing. What I would say is avoid when you can. So, for example, try really hard not to hire whatever business it is that your client works for or runs. So, if your client owns a carpet cleaning business and it's the only one in that town, you might have to call a carpet cleaning business from another town. Um, the other thing is to always check your motivations. Are you trying to hire this business or contract with this business because you want to help the client feel better about themselves, right? That's not the best way to go there. So those are things you have to think about. One of the things that happens is that clients sometimes want to give you gifts. Um, you have to determine the motivation for a client to give a gift. Like, what is this what need is being met for the client? I knew somebody who had a client come and they brought, I bake and I baked something, so here's a muffin. Oh, thank you very much. And then there was something else the next week and something else the next week. And what it turned out was that the client felt like if they didn't bring something, they weren't going to be wanted, right? So even though that the muffin and the cookies or whatever didn't wasn't worth a lot of money, the meaning behind it for the client was something that really needed to be worked with in counseling. There are cultural considerations around accepting gifts. Um, there are times when it is culturally appropriate for someone to give a gift to a counselor, particularly a school counselor. Um, and that's something that you have to think about. Like, how do you say no to that? What are you going to do with that? And what is your motivation for accepting or refusing the gift? So I have a friend of mine who, um, when I was at Mississippi State University, was a counselor working with athletes, and she loved baseball. Crazy baseball fan, college baseball. And she would go to the games. Some of them were the athletes that she counseled, some not, but she just loved the games. So she went to the games. She didn't like tell them she was watching for them or anything. She just went to the games. And when one of her clients ended counseling because they were feeling better and all of that, he tried to hand her box seats, which is like a big thing at Mississippi State, box seats to one of the baseball games, probably worth in the neighborhood of $150, $200 at the time, and this was quite a while ago. And she had to refuse because that is a pretty significant gift, and she knew ethically she wasn't allowed to take that significant gift from her clients. But let me tell you, it was painful because she really wanted to take those. So had she accepted that gift, what would have been her motivation for accepting that gift? Because she wanted to go to the game, right? And she definitely wanted the box seats. So that's something that you have to think about. How do you refuse a child? Or do you refuse a child, right? The one thing is to never take expensive gifts, and expensive meaning buy something over like $50. Just don't do it. I have had, like, if somebody brings in um, a big box of candy or something, and you're working in an office, you can put it, you can put it like uh, in the lunch area or whatever, so that everybody has access to it, kind of thing. If you can't refuse it, if there's not a way to refuse it, but generally, be very careful about accepting gifts with clients, and generally, you shouldn't do it. Um, but there are times when not accepting a gift actually does more harm than accepting a gift. So I said that we would talk a little bit about self-disclosure, and I will. There's different types of self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is when counselors discuss their personal preferences, values, or experience. And I usually tell beginning counselors, don't self-disclose anything about yourself at all. But you can do therapeutic self-disclosure, which are things like, I'm noticing in this session that you're very nervous. That is actually self-disclosure, because I'm talking about me and what I am noticing. So, or I am concerned about this, or I've noticed that you tend to do this and this and this, or I'm feeling anxious as you're feeling anxious. So Matt, talk to me about what's going on. Those kinds of things. But generally, I say don't do self-disclosure. The client does not need to know that you've been through something similar, or that you know somebody who's been through something similar, right? The client just doesn't need to know those things. Um, can it be therapeutic? Sometimes, if it's done appropriately, like I discussed. The thing you have to think about is, was it done for the client's benefit? And generally, it's not. It's usually done because the counselor feels the need to help the client feel better by telling them they're not alone, right? So just really be careful about self-disclosure. Um, and beginning counselors shouldn't really do it at all, actually. And one of the things that when I talk to beginning counselors about sexual attraction in counseling, they're like, "Oh, I'm not going to be sexually attracted to my clients. What are you talking about?" I realize that school counselors may not be sexually attracted to their young clients. I would hope not. But maybe the parents, maybe somebody in the school, right? So we have to acknowledge and deal with sexual feelings, um, and understand that there's a distinction between finding a client sexually attractive and a preoccupation with wanting to have a relationship, a sexual relationship with that client. Transient sexual feelings are absolutely normal. And it's crucial that you learn to accept your sexual feelings and decide how you're going to deal with them. There are times when I've been sexually attracted to clients, but that's not, I don't tell the client, because that's not about the client. That's about what's going on in my life at that moment, and what do I need to work on, right? And so ignoring the fact that you could be sexually attracted to a client is much worse than understanding it and trying to work on it for yourself and discussing it in supervision. Because if you ignore it completely, it can get out of hand. It'll be that all of a sudden you'll really be thinking about a client more and more, and that's when you cross over something that you shouldn't, right? A boundary that you shouldn't, because if you ignore it and pretend it's not there, you don't notice it as much when you're crossing over that boundary. Really important. Okay, so sexual relationships, don't do it. Just don't do it. Either current or past clients or relatives of clients, or you know, don't date a parent of a kid in your school. Just don't do it, right? It will harm your clients. There is no question. It'll harm your current, and or if they're a past client, past client. As I said before, you will always have a power differential over that person. Now, the ethical standards say if you really, really want to have a sexual relationship with a client, that you have to wait 5 years after the end of the counseling session. But there are a lot of people out in the world and a lot of other choices. Just don't do it. A lot of people lose their licenses because sexual relationships with clients, because they pretend it doesn't exist and then they cross over that boundary, right? So don't do it. Other dual relationships. Your professor is your supervisor or your boss or your advisor, right? So I've often had graduate assistants where I am their advisor, and they're also then in my classes. So there's weird dual relationships in master's and doctoral programs. Doctoral students and faculty often have dual relationships, particularly if they're a dissertation chair. Have I gone out to dinner with my past faculty? Yes, I did. We lived in a very small town. We went drinking with them as a doctoral fact. That probably wasn't the best thing, but anyway, you had to maintain very specific boundaries, right? When I'm your supervisor, this is who I am. When I'm your professor, this is who I am. When I'm working with your dissertation, this is who I am, kind of thing. Other things could happen is, like, say your child is friends at school with your client's child. Like, oops, how do you work around that if your child wants to invite that kid to their birthday party or whatever? You and your client might belong to the same organization or club. And of course, there's Facebook and other technology. And one of the things that I say is to inform consent, to have a technology type informed consent, letting clients know what you will and will not do in terms of friending on Facebook and that kind of stuff, or Instagram. As always, if you have any questions, you can upload them to Canvas or you can bring them to class.